Throughout history, civilizations thrived due to slavery. While it was, and still is, a horrific act, we cannot deny how influential it was to the modern world. So today, we are going to analyze the practice of slavery on a global scale. One of the first times slavery was mentioned in writing was the Code of Hammurabi all the way back in 1760 BC. Out of the 282 laws listed, at least 30 of them had to do with slavery. Since the Code of Hammurabi, slavery made its way out into the ancient world. Under Roman rule, a slave wasn't considered to be a person. They were considered as objects and property of their owners. Slaves, known to the Romans as servus, were often captured from other countries as prisoners of war or from people who willingly sold themselves or even family members into slavery to help pay off debts. Sometimes, unwanted or orphan children were taken in from the streets to be slaves too. The slaves in Rome were used for a variety of purposes, including manual labor, domestic assistance, entertainment, and sometimes skilled labor, like being a craftsman or physician. Slaves who had pleased their masters could potentially become something called libertus, where they were somewhere between slave and citizen, and their children would be citizens. Oddly enough, it was technically possible for Roman slaves to earn currency and they could potentially buy their own freedom. While treatment of slaves generally was more humane as time continued, slavery was legal throughout the duration of the Roman Empire. Slavery was a noteworthy subject in ancient China as well. While there were still slaves obtained through war or imported from other countries, there were other ways people could become slaves. For certain crimes, a punishment known as gong was used in which a man is castrated and forced into labor by the government. In ancient China, privately owned slaves were often forced to help farm and harvest or work in industries like silk production. Government-owned slaves, including the castrated criminals, were often sent to the imperial palace to work as housekeepers or on various construction projects like the Terracotta Army. Throughout ancient Africa, slaves were embedded within the structure of everyday life. While some were treated like property, others were treated more like indentured servants. The way they were treated varied from region to region. There were many types of slaves in Africa. Chattel slaves, which were your standard, treated like property kind of slaves. Domestic service slaves, who were able to maintain some freedoms, such as earned profits from labor, whether it be land or product, and were allowed to marry and pass down the earned land to children. Pawn ship slaves, also known as debt bondage slaves, were used as collateral to secure the repayment of debt. Also there were the military slaves, who were used as soldiers to gain money and political power for their patron, also known as a government official or an independent warlord. Lastly, there were the sacrifice slaves, who were sacrificed in various different rituals. Slavery was not uncommon in the ancient world. In fact, it was fairly common. But this is just the beginning. Slavery continues in the Middle Ages, but that's the next chapter in this tale of history.